Shalom, everyone. Welcome to the latest podcast. I apologize for how long it has taken. It just started raining. I just noticed that. Sorry. Sorry it's taken so long for me to get around to actually recording. I've been, I keep saying I really am going through a bunch of different things. I pulled my back, a muscle in my back, doing some yard work, and I'm still recovering from that. Today I've been feeling nauseous, and I've been trying to take care of that. And but also about a little over a week ago, I actually had a very interesting dream. I don't normally dream in a way that I feel has any meaning, any symbolism or whatever. But this dream was completely different, and seriously, like most, if not all of my study time has been focused on just trying to figure out what this dream means. And I actually share my dream, for those of you on iTunes who are unaware of my YouTube videos. I actually shared my dream on YouTube, and you can find that. It's very recent. It's called the I think it's called a Dream I Had and the Three Jewish Boys. In summary, just to sum it up really quickly, why it's been, on my mind and spirit lately is because in my dream there was a lot of symbolism. I saw three different things in the sky. One was northern lights in the south. One was one full moon that became four full moons, and all of them were in the front of a gigantic harvest moon. And then just straight above me was signs and the stars, namely the constellations, as we know, like Betula or Virgo is a constellation, so on, and those are very significant. So I saw these different things in the sky, and when I woke up, my first thought was that the four moons represented 4 months, and lo and behold, my dream happened on the first day of the 4th month, as well as on the exact same day that the three Jewish boys were that were murdered were found. So it's just been, I've been going like non-stop trying to figure out what that dream means. But today, I've been meaning to record the podcast, and I want to keep this going with this series. I'm not good with series. I'm really not, because it's I'll be studying on a particular topic, and then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, and I jump to another book and I start researching that. So it is what it is, and I apologize again for the time gap. But I do want to say that we need to be praying for Israel. The battles, the war, all this is just escalating. It's very different this time, I think, and there's something very... Oh, and by the way, in my dream, I said out loud in my dream, "This is the beginning," and all of a sudden, as you know, the retaliation and the escalation of the battles have begun. So, it is what it is. But we need to be praying for Israel, whether you believe that they have anything to do with Scripture or not. We still need to be praying for them. That is still where Jerusalem is. I believe that is where the Messiah is going to be setting up his kingdom. The Jews, Judah, Yehuda, the Yehudi, it's the same tribe that the Messiah is from. Likewise, I was just reading a passage, if I can bring it up here real quick. It's in Romans. Let me find it real quick. I posted it on Facebook. For those of you who don't know, it's facebook.com/Hebraic Perspectives. You can also join me, Michael D. Sofer, on Facebook. That passage, Romans 11. Let me just read this to you here. This is concerning the Jews and the Gentiles, and then we'll get into the teaching, continuing the series. So, quote, Romans 11:15-24, "For since the Jews' rejection meant that God offered salvation to the rest of the world, how much more wonderful their acceptance will be. It will be life for those who were dead. And since Abraham and the other patriarchs were holy, kadosh, their children will also be holy, kadosh. For if the roots of the tree are holy, and the branches will be too. But some of the branches from Abraham's tree, some of the Jews, have been broken off. And you goyim, you Gentiles, who were branches from a wild olive tree, were grafted in. So now you also receiving the blessing God has promised Abraham and his children, sharing in God's rich nourishment of his special olive tree. But you must be careful not to brag about being grafted in to replace the branches that were broken off. Remember, you are just a branch, not the root. Well, you may say, those branches were broken off to make room for me. Yes, but remember, those branches, the Jews, were broken off because they didn't believe God, and you are there because you do believe. Don't think highly of yourself, but fear what could happen. For if God did not spare the branches he put there in the first place, he won't spare you either. Notice how, and by the way, this is the greatest argument against once saved, always saved ever. But, let's see here. Notice how God is both kind and severe. He is severe to those who disobeyed, but kind to you as you continue to trust in his kindness. But if you stop trusting, you also will be cut off. And if the Jews turn from their unbelief, God will graft them back into the tree again. He has the power to do it. For if God was willing to take you, who were by nature branches from a wild olive tree, and graft you into his own good tree, a very unusual thing to do, he will be far more eager to graft the Jews back into the tree where they belong. So, you know, I've kind of faced a lot, and you know, they won't admit this, but it is a bit of an anti-Semitism, kind of the replacement theology, and I'm sorry that, you know, even here in Romans, he says only some of the branches, some of the Jews, not all of them. But that made way for the Goyim, the Gentiles, to become Hebrew, those who are crossed over and grafted into the covenant, into the good tree of the Messiah, of Israel. We are Israel. But you have to remember, not all the Jews reject the Messiah, so we have to be careful not to be in that way. And I think, personally, that the great deception is that Israel is not Israel. I think the great deception is causing people to speak out against current Israel, the nation of Israel, and you know, I have a lot of research behind that. I don't think that the deception is that Israel is not Israel or whatever. You know, I really think that's a New Age kind of thing, or a modern doctrine. I don't think it's scriptural, but I wanted to say that. I felt it was important to say, and I will leave it at that. Now, getting into our teaching. By the way, real quick, I will be working pretty, I'll be pretty focused on working on my third book. This third book that I'm going to be coming out with sometime in the distant future, in my opinion, will be more important than the first two books I wrote. And to explain what it'll be about, it's literally confronting many common questions that non-Torah keeping believers in Christ pose to those of us who believe in the Messiah and also keep the Torah or observe the Torah, submit ourselves to the Torah, and it's basically focusing on all those questions, and I'm literally trying to compile all the questions I can, and I've gotten quite a number of them, but I feel that there should be more questions added in, because each question will literally merit an answer that is its own study in Scripture. So there's no chapters, it's just going to be the questions, and that's all I'll be focusing on, is answering those questions. For example, why do you keep the seventh-day Sabbath? The disciples met on the first day, Sunday, and that will merit the whole study on why exactly we still are supposed to keep the seventh-day Sabbath, and that is a sign between believers and the Almighty, of those who belong to Him, and so on. So that's just one example of one question. If you know, or if you are asked, certain questions that, you either wish you could answer more, or you wish other believers in the Messiah understood better, please go to my website, michaeldsofair.com. I'll put it here on YouTube. And in the podcast, the link should be right there at the bottom. Sofer, by the way, is Sofer, so it's michaeldsofer.com. Contact me. You can go to facebook.com/Hebraic Perspectives, like the page, send me a message, comments, anything. And let me know common questions. And literally, I'm just compiling a list, and I'm going to be putting them all into the book and answering them from a Hebraic perspective and a scriptural standpoint. Okay, so we're 10 minutes in already. I haven't gone to the lesson. Man, my back is hurting. Okay, so the series so far, for those of you who are new to the podcast, we are talking about the difference between Jesus and Yeshua. Now, I don't have a problem with people who want to call Yeshua Jesus. Personally, I don't think that's his name. I'm not one of those who thinks that Jesus equals Hail Zeus. I did a study about that as well. You can find that on YouTube. But what it is basically that there's the Christian Jesus who taught against keeping the old law. All that's done away with, and we're in the new stuff now. It's all about the law of Christ, and the Old Testament's done away with, etc., etc. Or there's Yeshua, who really actually did exist. That was his name, Yeshua, or if you want to the full name, which is Yehoshua, which in English is, or I guess English, Joshua. And he actually endorsed and taught the Torah, and to keep the Torah. And the only difference is that the Levitical priesthood was transferred over to the order of Melchizedek priesthood, in which Yeshua is the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest. And, because the Levitical priesthood, they took care of the sacrifices and all the temple duties and so on. There's no temple, so what can the Levites do today? I still believe, Levites can do things today, and they probably, most likely will in the millennium and onward into eternity. However, right now, as the Brit Chadashah, or the New Testament, or the Renewed Covenant, has stated, we are the temple of the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, and in which the Melchizedek high priest, Yeshua himself, is the high priest of. Now, last week I said that I was going to be getting into, and this is just for this particular teaching, we're talking about Paul. And this is literally the difference between Paul and Sha'ul. Now, Paul, many people say that his name comes from the Greek Apollos. His name was Paul, but his real name, many people say, well, his original name was Saul, but really, if you look at the Hebrew, his name is pronounced Sha'ul. And so it's kind of the difference of what Paul taught versus what Sha'ul taught. Now, let me read to you. I should have already had this up, I apologize. Let me read to you, here it is. It's actually in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 16. Now, Peter says, concerning Sha'ul, or Paul, he writes the same way in all his letters, speaking in them of these matters. His letters contain some things that are hard to understand, which ignorant and unstable people distort, as they do the other scriptures, to their own destruction. So, Sha'ul, or Paul's writings, they are kind of difficult to understand. Read through Romans, or, I'll be in Romans today, by the way. I'll be in chapter 7, but I'll also be in Colossians chapter 2. He really does a lot of back and forth, and it's almost like whenever he's writing, he's literally just like thinking out loud. Like, imagine a man just walking around his room, kind of talking like, if I do this, then I'll have to do that, but if I do that, then that's not right, and they're just going through this whole thing with themselves, having a conversation. Like, eventually he kind of looks at the page that he's been writing, and he's like, oh, right, I'm writing to the Romans. Hey guys, sorry about that. So a lot of people got confused, and even in the time that he was writing these letters, back nearly 1900 years ago, they were hard to understand, and Peter himself even said, look, they're hard to understand. Ignorant and unstable people distort these letters that Paul or Sha'ul is writing, and they do so also with the other scriptures, to their own destruction. So that there's something there that, if you're Christian and you're reading this and you say, oh, I understand this, he's saying that the law's done away with, Peter's saying, most likely you're not getting it. You don't understand. It's too hard for you to understand. Not only are you distorting what Sha'ul or Paul is writing, but you're also doing the same thing for the scriptures. And remember when Peter said, as they do the other scriptures, in that day the only scriptures that really existed was the Tanakh, the Old Testament. That is what they were referred to. As a matter of fact, I even questioned if that the word other is there. But anyways, so I wanted to read that. Now what I'm going to actually start with is Romans chapter 7, verse 7. And I'm going to be doing a bit of reading here. So if you don't like that, you can turn this teaching off and go listen to Joel Osteen, because I heard that he doesn't like to read too much scripture because that turns people off. That was mean. Okay, so Romans chapter 7, verse 7, we're going to start here. Sha'ul, Paul, begins to say, "What shall we say then? Is the law sin, or is the Torah sin? Certainly not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin except through the Torah, the law." Now let me explain. In 1 John, go read the whole book. It's 5 chapters. I think 5 chapters, yeah. So, go read it, seriously. It's very, very good material. So is the whole Bible. But what he's saying, okay, what is sin? Seriously, ask a Christian, what is sin? Take a moment and think about that for a second. What is sin? Okay, now that you have your answer, let's go to 1 John, or you can just listen to me read it, I don't care. And it's actually chapter 3, verse 4. "Everyone who sins breaks the law, or the Torah. In fact, sin is lawlessness." That's what sin is. It is to be without Torah, without instruction. It is someone who breaks the law, who does not obey the law. What is the law? It's the Torah. It's the first 5 books. It's, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's these, every command there. And if you're like, well, some things were changed, were they not? Yes, go look at my teaching about the Melchizedek. You'll get where it, quote-unquote, changed. Oh, yeah, okay. So, verse 7. So he says, "I would not have known sin except through the Torah." Now, remember, the first 10 commandments state, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet. And he even goes into the covet side of it. He says, "For I would not have known covetousness unless the Torah had said, you shall not covet." So imagine, you haven't heard the law yet. You haven't heard the Torah. And so, you're looking at something and you start to covet it. And you're like, covet. So then someone comes along, let's say Moshe, and he says, you don't covet. You're not supposed to covet. And so, you go, oh, oops. And then you realize, as you were coveting, then someone told you you're not supposed to covet. Oh, okay, so it's wrong to covet. And that's what Sha'ul is saying. I would not have known covetousness unless the Torah had said, you shall not covet. Sorry if there was a cut there. I had a conversation with my daughter again. So, okay. Now, verse 8. "But sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire. For apart from the Torah, sin was dead." It's like, okay, without the law, what morality is there? I mean, taken to the fact, let's stick with covetousness. Without the law, without someone having said, that's wrong, it wouldn't have been wrong. Or at least until someone said, hey, that's wrong. And then you realize, oh, it's wrong. Now remember, it's like, well, if it wasn't wrong, why did he give the Torah in the first place, And it's like, well, it actually is, because remember, the Torah coming from the mouth of the Almighty was given to mankind because, look, if you want to be in relationship with Him, if you want to be in covenant with Him, this is the morality. This is the line in the sand, so to speak. that you are not to cross. This is what you were supposed. This is what he basically expects of his people. He says, "Look, okay, I'll be your Elohim, I'll be your king, but you're not supposed to be like everybody else. Look, the world, they covet. You know, I'm just sticking with covet because that's what Sha'ul's talking about. They covet things. That's their way. But I'm calling you to be set apart from that. So cross over from all that. You know, stop having other gods. Stop. Don't have idols or carved images. You know, don't commit adultery or covet or lie or steal. Get away from all that. If you want to be my people, then you'll stick to my laws, because this is my kingdom, okay? And these are my laws, these are my commands, my mitzvot. These are my instructions, my Torah. You know, that's the whole point of it, okay? I get some of you out there wish that certain instructions in the law and the Torah and the Ten Commandments didn't exist, because let's face it, we are in the flesh right now, and we want to partake, so to speak, in that aspect of things. So honestly, and you know, I'm not trying to call people out, make you uncomfortable, or whatever, but there's people out there that are married, and they'll look at another man or another woman, whatever, and they want to be with that person, but that would mean adultery, which is lawlessness. You know, that's sin that goes against the Torah. So if you don't, you know, if you don't want to be under, you know, if you don't want to be in the way, the way of the Almighty, if you don't want to be in accordance to His morality and His instructions, then you are allowed to step out, but you won't be a part of the kingdom anymore. Okay, it's just, there's no other way about it. And by the way, a lot of there's we as finite beings cannot speak in absolution. The Almighty can, but it's basically one of those things where what I'm talking about is all just, kind of examples of how the Torah works in some aspects, and so I'm just trying to get a bit further understanding, because realistically, if you read what Sha'ul's written here, you'll understand it in context. You have to read the whole context. You have to know that when he says certain things, he's actually quoting Torah. And in fact here, you shall not covet, that's Torah. So anyways, let's keep reading, because I'm going to go way over time here, but that's okay, because I haven't used a lot of record time this month. Okay, so, but sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire, for apart from the Torah, sin was dead. I was alive once without the Torah, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died, and the commandment, which was to bring life, I found to bring death. For sin, taking occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it killed me. Therefore, the Torah is holy, it's kadosh, it's set apart, and the commandment is holy, kadosh, set apart, and just and good. No, there's a bug in here. Get what he's saying. He's not saying that the law brought death. He's saying, look here, he even explains himself. For sin, taking occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it killed me. He explains it. Seriously, you just gotta look for it. It's right there. Verse 13. I'll try to go a little quicker, I apologize. Has then what is good become death to me? Remember, he just called the Torah good. Has then what is good become death to me? Certainly not. But sin, that it might appear sin, was producing death in me through what is good, so that sin, through the commandment, might become exceedingly sinful. And because remember, the curse of the law is basically when you sin, you die. Sin is death. It's lawlessness. It's being separate from God, and being in Torah is being set apart unto God. That was the point. So when someone said, "Oh, you're coveting, you're doing wrong," all of a sudden he realizes he's in death. And there was another cut there. I apologize. Again, full-time fatherhood. What can I say? So, where was I? I apologize. I really do. Okay, so verse 13. Okay, let's begin again in 14. For we know that the Torah is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. For what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I will to do, that I do not practice. But what I hate, that I do. If then I do what I will not to do, I agree that the Torah that it is good. But now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. For I know that in me, that is, in my flesh, nothing good dwells. For to will is present with me, but how to perform what is good I do not find. For the good that I will to do, I do not do, but the evil I will not to do, that I practice. And this is where people are like, what? Verse 20. Now if I do what I will not to do, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. I find the Torah. I find then a law, that evil is present with me, the one who wills to do good. For I delight in the Torah of God according to the inward man. Ooh, so what's he saying here? He delights in the Torah of the Almighty, according to the inward man. What's that? Oh, that's the Spirit. 23. But I see another law in my members, the flesh, warring against the Torah of my mind, or the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. So he just brought up all these different laws all of a sudden. You got the law of God, you got the law in the members, warring against the law of the mind, and bringing into captivity the law of sin, which is in my members. And it's like, whoa, how many laws are there? And that's why people get confused about what Sha'ul teaches. Because when they read something like the King James Version, and see, if you're following along, you might be noticing that I'm replacing some of the references of law with Torah. I do that on purpose because I call it Torah, and that's actually how I read whenever I'm reading it. My mind just automatically sees Torah. So let's go to verse 24. O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? I thank Yah, God, Yehovah, through Yeshua Messiah, our Lord, Adonai. So then, with the mind I myself serve, the Torah of God, but with the flesh, the Torah of sin, the law of sin. Very interesting stuff, huh? Okay, so now we're in chapter 8. There is, therefore, now no condemnation to those who are in Messiah Yeshua, who do not walk according to the flesh, the law of sin, but according to the Spirit, the law of God. For the law of the Spirit, I'll try to stick with the word law. For the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua has made me free from the law of sin and death. Okay? Now, by the way, those of you who are law of Christers, he's talking about the law of God here. Okay? He even says it. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. On account of sin, lawlessness, he condemned sin, lawlessness, in the flesh, that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us, who do not walk according to the flesh, the law of sin, lawlessness, but according to the Spirit, those of us who keep the Torah, the law of God, and delight in it, by the way. Verse 5, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, sin. But those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit, the law of God. And again, law of God. I keep thinking about that Jim Staley debate because the guy was like, we're under the law of Christ now, it's not the law of God. Jim Staley won. Sorry. Okay, verse 6. For to be carnally minded is death. And what's the curse of the law? That sin brings death. Okay, that's nothing new, to be honest with you. But the spiritually minded is life and peace. It's chai and shalom. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God. for it does not subject to the Torah of God, the law of God, nor indeed can be. So remember, those, you know, I hate putting it this way, but those of you who are saying, we're not under the law anymore, guess what Paul's telling you right here? You are enmity against God. All right? You know, this bugged me for months when I first learned all this stuff, and I finally just had to submit to God, and that's when I finally started thinking spiritually. Okay? It sounds mean, but don't write me hate mail, okay? It's him saying it, not me. Though I agree with him. Okay, so where was I? I don't even know. Okay, verse 8. So then, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Those who are in sin, who are in lawlessness, according to the law of sin, not according to the law of God. Verse 9, but you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you. Now if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, or of the Messiah, he is not his. And if Messiah is in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the Spirit is life because of righteousness. But if the Spirit of him who raised Yeshua from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Messiah from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who dwells in you. So, if you're carnally minded, you're not in the law of God. If you are spiritually minded, if you are in the Spirit, according to the Spirit, you will submit yourselves to the Torah, the law of God. Very easy to understand. Now, here's the passage that really gets to people. Okay, so I guess we'll start in verse 11. I'm sorry, Colossians chapter 2, verse 11. This is another writing of Sha'ul's, Paul. I'll go ahead and start. In him you are also circumcised with circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Messiah, buried with him in baptism, or mikvah, in which you also were raised with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. And you, being dead in your trespasses, your iniquities, your lawlessness, your sin, being against the law of God, and the circumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses. Forgiving, not wiping away the law. It's forgiving you your transgression of the law. Okay, your trespasses against the law, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. Now, a lot of people look at that and see, got you! The law of God was nailed to the cross. And they think that that is like the end result, in which I look at the camera right now and say, keep reading. Alright? Verse 15, having disarmed principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. Now, when did Yeshua do stuff like that? Now, a lot of people automatically assume powers and principalities, that it's talking about demon spirits, in which I agree to an extent that is what he's talking about. However, powers and principalities also refers to those who... I just spit everywhere. Those who did things against Torah. Now, one of the things that Torah teaches is not to add to or take away. And you know a false prophet, if he teaches you something that is outside of Torah, they're a false prophet. I'm sorry, that's the Deuteronomy 13 test right there. Now, the Pharisees, the Prushim, they actually came in and gave a bunch of extra laws. It's called Takanot, and they claim that they were given an oral Torah alongside the written Torah at Sinai, which is untrue. But they claim that they were given that, and they were also given authority to rewrite Torah commands. So these powers and principalities, anytime you see Yeshua doing something that looks like he's breaking a command, like for example, they came up to him, he's like, why aren't you washing your hands? And then he's like, all food is clean. People, because they don't fear the Almighty like they should, they look at that and they do exactly what Peter says they do. They're twisting what's being said. And what he's really saying is, Okay, go get me a Torah and show me where the Almighty Himself said to wash your hands before you eat. It was a ceremonial thing, and that was what the Prussian, the Pharisees, were teaching. You know, you're supposed to wash your hands, and that will make you ritually clean. Why aren't you doing it? God commands us to do this. No, he never commanded us to do that, to wash our hands before we eat. And when Yeshua said all food is clean, yes, all food as defined by the Torah is clean without you having to wash your hands. There's no ceremonial thing to it. And he made a spectacle of him. You know, he even did this one time. Remember, he healed the blind man. He spat into some dirt, made mud, and wiped it on his eyes on the Sabbath day. And you know, told him to go dip in the water and go tell the Pharisees what happened. And then he traveled a Sabbath day journey. Quadruple whammy right there. That's one of the Pharisees' own laws that state that you're not to spit and make mud. You're not supposed to wipe it in your eyes. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to travel more than this distance on the Sabbath. And none of that is an actual Torah. And Yeshua, making a spectacle of them, did it anyway. Why? Having disarmed principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. So now, it's like, do you understand what he's talking about? He's not talking about making a public spectacle of the law of God. Because Paul just said in Romans, I just read it, that the law of God is to be spiritually minded, and that is showing your favor in the sight of God. That is to be good, just, and holy. Let's keep reading. Verse 16, so let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Messiah. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worshipping of angels, like Catholics do, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. And by the way, that whole part there, don't let anyone sit and judge of you of food or drink or regarding a festival or new moons or Sabbaths. Don't let anyone be in judgment of you. Why would anyone be in judgment of you for it? What does a judge do? He judges you for doing something that is wrong. According to the Torah, you're supposed to eat what is right. You're supposed to drink what is right. You were supposed to observe his moedim, his feasts and festivals. You're supposed to tell time in accordance to his new moons. You're supposed to keep the seventh-day Sabbath. So, you know, if you're breaking these things, he's saying, don't let anyone be in judgment of you against these things, okay? I know Christians misunderstand that, but whatever. Verse 19, not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the increase that is from God. Therefore, if you died with Messiah from the basic principles of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Regulations that are not of the law of God. They are of the world. This is the big part here. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using, according to the commandments and doctrines of men. Not God, men. I'll read this last verse. These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom, and self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. Case in point, his argument, Paul, Sha'ul, his argument was never against the law of God. In fact, I just read it to you. He endorsed it. He taught it. He said, it's good. It's just. It's holy. Now, when he's talking about nailing things to the cross, what is he talking about? He explains himself. If you keep reading further, if you read the context, he says it's the laws and doctrines and the commandments of men. And I know I even used to use this argument back when I was a Christian. And it's like, well, Moses was a man and he wrote it, but you don't see the part because you don't read that. Gosh, I'm getting mean. That God himself spoke it, and so Moses wrote it. What the scriptures, even the scriptures themselves say that the word is inspired. What does inspired mean? Well, what does expire mean? to lose breath. What does inspire mean? It means to be God-breathed, in-breathed. He breathed it into Moshe, and therefore he wrote it. When the Almighty spoke it, he said, "Thou shalt not murder." Moshe wrote that down. Okay? So stop saying that, the law of God is a tradition of man. No. Yeshua himself, Sha'ul himself also after Yeshua, their message was the same. Get back to Shuvah, repent unto the law of God. Return to the ways of God. And that was the message of every single prophet of God. Get back to the ways of God. Follow his commandments. Keep his commandments. Keep his law. Keep his Torah. Return to it. And, because of the Pharisees at that time and today as well, teaching things that are outside of Torah, saying, hey, you actually have to put the right shoe on first and then the left shoe, and then go back and tie it. These are commands. Before you wash your hands, you're supposed to wash them a certain amount of times. You have to recite this prayer, and so on. You're not supposed to travel this far on the Sabbath, etc., etc. And it's like, look, you're not God. You did not write the Torah. In fact, your takanot is completely against the Almighty, and you're going to be judged for it. So don't sit there and judge me for keeping the commands. Okay? So, you can kind of tell I'm getting all kind of excited about this. And that's because I'm just so tired of Christians and just everyone saying that there's something else outside the Scriptures that is untrue, and saying that the Scriptures themselves are, of no effect, that they're dead. They're not dead. Okay? Yeah. Let God be true and every man a liar. So, shalom, Toda, for listening. Sorry I went so long. Sorry I got so excited. I hope that you could get something out of this. But nevertheless, shalom to you, and pray for me. Okay, I'm turning it off now. Shalom.